Welcome to the Make Space for Growth podcast. My name is Sara Vicente Barreto, and I'm your host. I'm a corporate strategist, problem solver, social entrepreneur, writer, mom of two, and passionate for growth, at home, in business, or in my community. This is season 2 of the Make Space for Growth podcast, A Moment of Lift. 2020 will be remembered by most as the coronavirus year. New words got added to our dictionary. As a world, that was our common factor. But individually, we all had different stories. We all experienced it differently. As we get to 2021, our journey has continued, strengthened by what we leave behind and hopeful for what lies ahead. From a good, bad, or so-so year, we've been rising to this challenge. We lift our souls to believe, we lift our minds from this fear, and we lift our lives from the dark times that we leave behind. This is our moment of lift, as we got out of this crisis stronger and together. 2021 has been a long year already, but it does feel like it's turning. The inflection point seems to be upon us, even if though unfortunately not everywhere. In some places, we're starting to see light at the end of the tunnel. As such, for this reason, I'm going after a moment of lift. I restarted my virtual travels around the world to speak to women leaders on the change they have experienced and how they see the path forward. We will be talking about the moment where we find ourselves and how we choose to effect change. The moment of turning around and choosing to move forward and facing life fearless and joyful. Join me for this journey to find out how, because it is time for hope and light. Joining me today, I have Kerstin Robinson. Kerstin is the co-founder of drinks brand Nix&Kix, which is stocked in major supermarket chains: Tesco, Waitrose, Sainsbury's, Morrison's, Ocado, you choose it. It's also in restaurants like Nando's and other national chains just around the corner in BP or WH Smith. Prior to founding the company, Kerstin worked in the financial industry for Deutsche Bank, Credit Suisse, and HSBC. Today, we're going to talk about the business, the change from finance into a consumer product startup, and naturally, the times of the pandemic. Let's dive in. Kerstin, welcome to the Make Space for Growth podcast. It's a great pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So before we go and talk business, may I ask you, what was your favorite thing to do as a child, and what did you want to be when you grew up?
My favorite thing to do was so I grew up in a very small village with 200 people. Half of that was my family. Always been around fresh produce, fresh vegetables, fresh fruit. We always grew our own stuff. We had asparagus fields. That part I hated, because getting up early in the morning, going out to the asparagus fields was never a fun thing. But I loved going to, these strawberry picking fields where you can go to, and obviously at the end you will have a basket full of strawberries and you have to pay for that, but while you're there you can eat as much as you want, and I loved that as a child, just going out there and eating, and especially because when strawberries are in season, which they are now, it's the most amazing things. Always loved nature and always loved like fresh stuff, so I guess that was a great childhood memory for me. What I wanted to be when I grew up was very different, actually, because so given that we didn't really have much going on in our village, for me, the biggest highlight was always to go to the bank in the neighbor town, and there was like this one day a year where you would gather all your coins the whole year that you gathered, and you would bring it to that branch, and they would like put it in a big machine and then count the coins, and there was this person there behind the counter, and that person would be like just typing on a calculator without actually needing to look what they were doing. And I was always so fascinated by that. I'm like, when I grow up, I want to work in a bank. And funny enough, I did end up in finance then. So
Well, as you said, you did start kind of there, and I gave a small intro about you before we got started. But that's the formal bio. The best story is told in the first person. You were in finance in your previous life, and I was wondering if maybe we could talk a little bit about kind of how you left the corporate side to set up your first business. What triggered you? Can you share a bit about that? Because there's always a lot of people doing that question to themselves, I guess.
Yes, and it's definitely not easy. It was not an easy step to make, but so I was working in finance for over 10 years when I made that decision. And mainly, because, I wanted to change, of course, and no bigger change than going from a massive company. I worked for HSBC at the time, to obviously founding your own business at a point where wasn't so happy anymore with what I was doing. And what really helped was then having someone else, my best friend, to say, well, actually, I'm also not that happy in my job. She also worked for a massive company. Let's maybe go out and do things together and just, test things out. So it wasn't like from one day to the next, we're like, okay, let's just quit our job and see what's going to happen. And we did spend a bit of time researching and figuring out what we want to do. And before we then quit our jobs, it was a big jump. But obviously, I don't regret it at all.
It's interesting because you bring the perspective of you wanted to leave, and then you spend some time doing research to then go. Some people actually start the opposite way because they may have some idea and that's what triggers them. And you just mentioned that you actually joined up in business with your best friend, which wasn't part of my lineup of questions. But I may add one on that. Given I think it's there's always a bit of different views about that. But let's then talk about the idea you had and Nix&Kix. You say your mission, and I love that on your website, is to banish boredom and put some healthy excitement back into soft drinks. It's a pretty big statement. Can you tell me a little bit more about the idea behind it and how you would frame your mission?
So the idea behind the business, and that's how we actually ended up making what we're making, was because whenever we went out and wanted to have a non-alcoholic option in a restaurant, in a bar, in a pub, the options were very limited. It was only water, cranberry juice, orange juice, and a few other brands that weren't very exciting. So we thought, that is definitely a big gap in the market, especially seeing what was available in the US in terms of drink choices there. So we thought, we can do a lot better. Obviously, when you're not drinking, you want to have something that is exciting still, because you don't want to feel like you're missing out. But at the same time, you don't want to have a sugary beverage full of bad stuff. So that was kind of our thinking. We're going to create something that tastes great, but also is actually better for you than most options out there. So that's where the idea came from.
The idea of the brand is where it all starts. I'm always very curious about, you have this idea, but then how do things go to work? And obviously we've had a pandemic in the last year, which we're talking about. Let's go to that first moment. So you've identified this gap. You knew that's what you wanted to do, to create an exciting drink. But you came from finance. You mentioned your best friend came from a big corporate. You had probably no prior experience in the sector other than maybe the strawberry picking.
No, it wasn't very useful for that either.
No, and it gives you a little bit of feel of the nature. But what steps did you take to get you started?
So yes, we started with very small steps, and I would do it exactly like that again if I had to go back and do it again. Luckily not. But in small steps, as in we would go to farmers market initially. We would make some drinks in our kitchen at home, very small cost, and then we would ask people what they thought about the product. Obviously, always we have to be a bit careful there, because people, once they realize that we're the owners and we have made this product, and they will probably not give us an honest opinion. But finding out by what sells best and what doesn't sell very well, that already gave us a good clue about what kind of flavors we should go for, what kind of ingredients people like. So that was a great first starting point, and super easy to do without much budget. And then we moved on from there. So it was kind of step by step. So then we knew kind of what was our core range at the time. So then we approached customers, as in cafes, restaurants in the area in central London, and just wanted to figure out, once that product is on a shelf, how will it be doing there? So we found a few customers at the time that said, okay, fine, we'll put it on our shelf and we'll see what it does, which again was amazing, because at that point then obviously the product had to sell itself. It was still, back then, we labeled it ourselves, we made it ourselves. It was very much small scale, but it gave us a lot of information again around what product would people pick up. Sometimes we would also hang around in the shop, trying to be waiting for someone to come to the shelf and pick it up. Yes, and occasionally would go up to that person and ask, why did you choose this flavor? And obviously people would always be a bit ooh, what's going on? Who are you? Why are you asking me this funny question? But for us it was amazing. We got a lot of information that way. And again, it was very small scale, very cheap to do. And from then onwards, we finalized kind of our flavor range, and then got like an ingredient supplier to supply us a small amount of ingredients, found a very small scale manufacturer that would just make us a run of 1,000 bottles per flavor. And again, would go like, we went to a coffee festival in London, sold out on the first day, so knew there was something there. And then from there, and then it was basically step by step rather than just going all in, thinking, okay, fine, I have my flavor lineup right here. I'm just going to spend, I don't know, 50,000 pounds on like setting it up and then not really, getting anywhere. So it's better like, understanding what do people actually want, because what I want is not what most people probably want. So I need to just adjust accordingly.
So you mentioned a few interesting points in there. I think I am curious. You said we manufactured and labeled it ourselves. Was this in your own kitchen kind of thing?
Yes, we found a salad shop in central London that would let us have the back of the shop as a kind of a kitchen space, so we could make the product there. And then we would put it on their shelf, and we said, we don't want any money for the drinks. If you let us have your kitchen, we'll just put it on the shelf, and all the profit, that's yours, or the money that is generated through that. So it was a really nice relationship. But yeah, that was still very small scale. It was still us making the product at night, ready for the next morning.
You always hear of how people come up with creative ideas, and you clearly came up with partnering with a kitchen shop, hanging out in the cafe to test out your samples. And obviously you have the brand that you have today, but there's the next step, which is right. You've identified your manufacturer, your flavors. One of the big things in consumer products is, way better than me, is the channels you go to. And I know we talked about that in the past. One of our guests last time around, Jessica, she was saying, where her first business, they had gone omni-channel, everything. And actually on her second one, she's like, I'm just doing one channel. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you and your partner thought about it, and how did you start and how did you evolve?
Yeah, so we also started just with one channel, and I guess, that's a good way to start, because you can't be everywhere. And if you're a small business, just of two people as we were, you can't be like, oh yeah, now I'm going to this retailer and I'm going to do this. It is impossible almost. Started not in these days, a lot of businesses will start in online because it's the easiest way to do things. At the time, that wasn't really the case. So we went for coffee shops and kind of lunchtime places, places that we could easily reach. As I said earlier, we could just walk in and there would be usually the manager. They would be independently owned. You can talk to the person that either owns or manages the place. They can make a decision quite quickly. So they're like, oh yeah, just put it on a shelf and see what happens. So that was our channel, I guess, initially, just going around into small coffee shops and seeding the product into those, which was a great strategy for quite some time. And it was going amazingly well. Everything was fine. September, October came and they said, well, talk to you next year. And we're like, what do you mean next year? And they're like, well, it's going to get cold now. People are not going to have cold drinks in a coffee shop in the winter. So that was a big learning for us, which we didn't anticipate at all, but makes perfect sense. Obviously had that channel and then didn't have that channel for a while. So I had to then think about other things. And then obviously our thinking was initially, we wanted to be an alternative to alcohol. So where would that have to be then? It would have to be in a pub or in a bar. So that was an interesting channel for us as well. So we're like, okay, fine, let's tackle that channel. But then quickly found out that actually in a pub, when you think about it, where is a non-alcoholic beverage in a pub? It's usually not presented on the top shelf. It's at the bottom of the shelf, and someone that was looking for a non-alcoholic drink would have real struggle finding it. And then also a bar or bartenders in general would be, they would recommend, if you ask them what kind of non-alcoholic options have you got, they would be like, yeah, I don't have time. Here's Coke, here's some lemonade or orange juice. And they wouldn't really have the time to explain to a customer what our new drink was. So while we had them in some really good bar chains in London, they, we weren't really selling that much because no one knew that we were there. So that wasn't really a good channel as well. And funny enough, these chains, some of them really did say to us, we like the product, but come back once your product is in retail, because that's where a consumer will get to know a brand, because they will go there anyway. They do their weekly shopping there. They will look around. That's the time when they have a bit of time to look around, and you are on a shelf to go with all the other brands. So you're more visible there. And that was really good learning for us. And then we started to focus on retail, and then quickly got into Ocado, into Waitrose, into Tesco's. That was in 2017, and we're still in all of these retailers. Yeah, that really kicked it off for us, and retail is still our biggest channel now, so definitely was the right decision to go in there. And with that, then also later moved into other channels as we then also created different formats. So initially it was just a 330 ml bottle. Now we also have cans, and we have sharing bottles, glass bottles. So that really opened then the gates to other channels as well. Where, for example, in food service, so staff, restaurants, etc., they would have the can. Back of store in a Tesco, we have the sharing bottle. So we realized quite quickly, actually, this product can go everywhere, of course, within limits. And now, because when the pandemic hit, we were so happy that we had these different channels. Had we had only on-trade as a channel, we would have had really bad times. But actually, that's, of course, on-trade shut down. But then retail was thriving. Obviously, initially not so much with our product, because everyone was like buying toilet paper. But quickly after realized that the other things they needed as well. And actually, then retail was doing amazingly well for us. So it was actually a good thing to have that.
So you got us started already, because I obviously wanted to talk a little bit about how the business did in the pandemic. So other than the phase where people were buying the toilet paper and nothing else, what happened to your business and different channels, and what changes did you actually have to make to deal with it?
Yeah, retail, as I said, is doing still amazingly well. And we had our best weeks ever last year in retail. So and we continue to have really, really good results there. So that really helped. Online shopping, of course. Ocado's been doing really, really well. And with that, obviously, we then also added our own online channel. So we went through a big rebrand last year. So for a while, didn't really focus too much on our own website. And now also have got this sorted and really can see some good sales from there. And Amazon, of course, is an amazing channel for us. So that definitely changed a lot during the pandemic. On-trade, as I said, food service completely disappeared and is only now coming back. So that was obviously very unfortunate, but still not completely bad. So for example, we launched in Nando's during the pandemic. And while obviously most of the time Nando's was shut, we couldn't really see much sales from there, but they did a lot of delivery orders. And also when they were open, it was going really well. So that wasn't all too bad, but obviously could have been a lot better. And we had forecasted for this channel to be a lot better. But one thing that came out of the pandemic as well is that we realized that convenience is a really good channel for a product. So during the pandemic, a lot of people then did their shopping in their local corner stores or in BP service stations where we are stocked. And we saw suddenly sales in BP go through the roof. And that was amazing as well, and good learning for us. Oh, well, convenience, that's maybe a channel we should go after more. So now I've actually hired someone specifically to look after that channel. So that was a really good result that came out of the pandemic.
So you answered my next question already, but maybe you have others. Obviously businesses really struggled, and there was an adjustment that was needed, especially when you have an entire channel that dies overnight. You have to cope with that. But at the same time, I've been finding through doing this podcast and bringing women here is actually there are things that you changed and they were for the best. They ended up having a positive effect. And you talked about the convenience. Are there other examples you have there?
So from a business perspective, what changed is we got rid of our office. So that was a big change, something we could have never even thought about before. Is it even, everyone working from home?
You need an office.
It still works. That's like, wow, incredible. But actually, yeah, we had to make it happen, and it did work. And we got rid of our office, and we are still working from home now. And obviously I'm planning to maybe, mix it up a little bit and find some sort of hybrid model. But quite a few of our team moved out of London, and we hired new people that are not based in London, which again is an amazing thing. Before the pandemic, we would have probably never thought about hiring someone that is not in London. And now actually we can look at all this talent from all over the UK, or not even in the UK, necessarily. Definitely broaden our horizon a lot in that respect.
That's great to hear. So you've been an entrepreneur for, I want to say, almost 7 years now. What were the most difficult decisions you had to do during this journey? And it doesn't have to be pandemic related, maybe it is, but what did you find challenging through this time?
Yeah, so luckily that didn't happen during the pandemic, but before it happened once in a while that, we had to let people go. anything people related is obviously not always easy, because you can't control things happen. And there were occasions when we hired the wrong person. We didn't realize until that person was in the job, and maybe for some time in the job. And that was a really difficult decision, because these people might not, they were actually good, they were just not right for us. Especially being a small business, someone might have all the experience and might be really, really good at what they're doing, but for a big business, and if you don't have the budget, and if you don't have all these tools that a big business has, it is very, very different. So yeah, we had to make decisions that that felt difficult, because we really like these people, but for the business it wasn't the right thing to keep them. So that was definitely very hard. Decisions like, for example, we had a flavor, peach and vanilla, which we liked a lot, and there was definitely a niche group of people also liked it, but it didn't have broad appeal, and so we had to get rid of it. That was a difficult decision as well, because it was one of our first flavors that we created, but it was the right decision to make. Maybe we'll bring it back as a limited edition one day. All these difficult decisions were obviously made for a reason, so sometimes you just have to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And but I want to go into getting to meet you more, and not just the business. But I think before we go, you've just completed a big milestone for the business, which you told me about last time we spoke. Will you let us know a bit more about the crowdfunding you've just done, and kind of how it worked out for you and why you decided to get into it?
Yes. So the crowdfunding was a great success. We got much more than we actually wanted from the crowd. So there's really good problem. Yes. And obviously it was a big project in itself. Even before getting onto the platform, it took us quite some time to get ready for it. While you're on the platform, it's very, very intense, because you get tons of questions and lots of requests for information and all that. So you just have to be constantly on it. And obviously there's no Saturday, Sunday anyway. I mean, anyone, some people, they find only time on a Sunday evening when they suddenly ask you a ton of questions. Yes. And maybe me too.
I missed it.
Yeah. So I get it. But it's just always like, okay, could you have not waited for a day? Yeah, no, generally it was a great experience. It was really, really good to go through it and just to see how it works. And even afterwards, of course, it's not quite done once the button is hit and the money is officially there. You need to do a lot more on the legal side. Yeah, overall very, very happy to have done it, because now we have a lot of a crowd of people invested in the business that maybe have not even heard of us before, and can be now our ambassadors, talking to their friends and their family about it. So overall great, but yeah, can't be underestimated how much work it is.
Yeah, and it makes me think, we had Amy here before. She runs a digital platform, a platform for women empowerment, and one of the things she brought up was how difficult it is to raise funds, how difficult it is for women to raise funds, and how difficult it is for women to raise funds in a pandemic.
Yes.
You've gone a route which was not maybe the angel or the VC route. You've gone the crowdfunding route. Why did you decide to go that way?
We had already angel investors on board. It wasn't like that wasn't our first round. And as a first round, it depends on the product, but I would probably also still recommend doing a more angel type round, a bit smaller. But for us, it just felt right at that point. We had our new branding done, which we were very proud of. We had a great number of obviously customers. We had a great story to tell. So it was easy then to make this video, put it on the platform, let people know about what we're up to. And the main reason, as I said, was just to get more kind of people bought into the brand that were not only investors, but also ambassadors for the business. So just to spread the word a bit more. And obviously we had some of our existing investors come into that round as well. It wasn't just the crowd, but just giving us the access to these people that would have never even thought about investing in us was just really, really good.
For sure. And if you've invested in a brand and if you see it on the shelf, you're more likely going to be taking that one and telling your friends to take that one. So
exactly. Yes.
It's the type of bias that you want in shopping.
Definitely.
Oh, one last one on the business. You've just done this round, and this pandemic seems to be starting to be behind our backs without me, I'm just going to say that very carefully, or at least not all over us at the moment. What opportunities, this is I've named the season Moment of Lift. So for us to look forward, what opportunities do you see for Nix&Kix going forward?
The opportunity for us is now really, I mean, we're already stocked in obviously most retailers and, as I say, Nando's and then in lots of, convenience outlets, service stations, etc. So for us, the opportunity now really is there to spread the word. And because the product itself, we know people love once they try it. Once someone tries our product, they usually buy it. They buy it again. We have very good repurchase rates as well that we can see from the retailers. So that's not the issue. It is more around, how do we even get people to hear about us? And then, okay, so they hear about us, but then try the product. Those steps, that's kind of our big thing to look at this year and beyond, because now we have the branding fixed, we are ready to go as a team. We've got everything in place, but still, 99% of the population probably have not heard of us before. So it's always like frustrating when you then let someone try it and they're like, oh, amazing, why have I not heard of this before? I would have always bought that. Okay. So yeah, that's basically the big opportunity for us. We can grow so much faster when we get more people to buy into the brand.
It's that step of where have you been all my life? That's where you want people to go to without getting frustrated that they haven't heard about you yet.
Exactly. And then immediately put the subscribe and save on the website and get like on a weekly basis
exactly.
a box delivered. Yes.
So let's move to the Kerstin and outside the business for a moment, even though I know that the two are never really separate. Can we, I've had guests here from around the world. So can you just place people and say, where were you when kind of the first wave of the pandemic hit, and how were the restrictions and how that affected you directly?
Yeah, so I was in central London. That's where I live. Yes, I mean, everything's changed here. It's interesting that, everywhere else seemed to be buzzing, like in terms of like the outskirts of London. Whenever we ventured out a little bit from our area, we could see like, oh, people. Whereas here in our neighborhood, it was completely quiet. So there was not much going on. The shops that were here were still open. They all shut at 9 o'clock, and it was like a ghost town. So I went for a run at 5 o'clock, and I felt like, wow, in the city of London, no one in the street apart from me, it felt like. So that was definitely very interesting, very different.
Yeah. Well, they went through stages. There were places that I found where you would go through shops and shops of closed doors. And then there were other streets that I went to and I'm like, okay, an ice cream store became essential because they stayed open. I don't know. It was in where I live, it was a little bit on both ends, depending on which street you went to. But yeah, definitely the amount of traffic sometimes was heavily reduced. I would say. And Kerstin, a lot of people started like new things, I don't know, baking, painting my numbers, puzzles, new books, new skills, people, there were all sorts of things going around and all sorts of peer pressure to be like, what are you doing now? Did you start anything new?
Not anything new in that sense, but we got a little puppy during the pandemic, like a lot of people.
You were part of the run.
But so it was always our dream to get a dog anyway, but obviously then the pandemic made us think, oh well, actually now would be a good time. Obviously everyone else also thought that, and it was really difficult getting a dog, but we did end up then finding a little mini dachshund that we welcomed into our home in October last year, and that definitely kept us very, very busy.
And what was it that you missed the most during the pandemic, especially the hardest lockdown times?
What I missed, of course, was just doing the normal daily things we used to do before, going to your local coffee shop or, sitting inside, meeting some people, having a conversation. It felt like, especially meeting people, that obviously went completely away, and a screen really can't replace that. And I noticed it now that we're able to meet people in person again, how much easier and how much better it is to have conversations face to face. So definitely you can't not have them, even if you have a remote team, you still have to meet them once in a while. Yeah. And then obviously also my family that I haven't seen in over years, visiting them, even though they're not in this country, but it's like an hour on a plane, and I haven't actually been on that plane in a long time.
It's very interesting because I'm originally from Portugal, and we would go home kind of every 6 weeks, every 8 weeks, maybe with the children a bit less. And suddenly, and you're like, oh, it's just a 2 hours flight, it's fine. And then suddenly you're like, wow, it's really far now.
Exactly.
It does put it in perspective how far it is to actually have to get on a plane and do that. You started that a bit. We know the pandemic, it has had maybe these fun things like having a puppy, but it also brought great struggles. And in this season, I try and speak a little bit more about like, how do we look forward, right? How do we lift ourselves up? Mental health has always been a bit of a big topic for me. And so I am keen to talk about tools that work for people, how people have managed through, and also how people are looking forward and looking at the possibilities, even though, we can't safely say this is behind our backs. Can you share maybe, if you don't mind, what was your high point and your low point in this journey?
I mean, in terms of high points, of course, I mentioned quite a few already, getting that rebrand finally done, launching the crowdfunding campaign and it being then also quite successful, and still getting lots of listings, like the Nando's listing. We launched in a retail chain, in a few other places. We launched with the biggest on-trade distributor called Matthew Clark in December last year during lockdown. So basically haven't really seen much benefit from it yet, but it's amazing because we were chasing that distributor for like 6 years. So it's amazing that a pandemic had to happen for us to then finally get them on board. So there were lots of good things, and good that a lot of them were business related. That I would say positive, and obviously also positive that I remained healthy and everyone else, my parents kept quite okay. So that was all very positive. On the negative side, I don't really share that much with people. Is that I lost my best friend from back home. So she sadly was a victim of coronavirus, not because of the disease itself, but because of mental health, as you said. Unfortunately, she couldn't handle it, and that was the lowest moment by far in the pandemic. It happened on the day the crowdfunding campaign went live. So while I was trying to celebrate one thing, I was miserable on the other hand. And that was definitely the lowest point probably in my whole life, but definitely in the pandemic.
No, and I appreciate you sharing, because it's sometimes obviously it's the low points that we don't always share, but it's part of the reason why I ask, because I do think there was a fair amount that we've been through, and it does. I do have the feeling that at least in the last 18 months, it became more acceptable to talk about that, and that hopefully will help us turn around and avoid some of those extreme situations in the future. I've unfortunately had, it wasn't the best friend, but I've had a similar case, and so and unfortunately there was a fair amount going on, because this was a dark time for people. How did you, keep a positive attitude, and kind of how you managed yourself, especially with that hit? But I'm sure you also had a lot of ups and downs that were smaller ups and downs, but that actually, it keeps on hitting. How did you manage yourself? What tips, tools would you have used and that you'd recommend?
I mean, obviously I'm still learning, there's never like, oh yes, I've got all the tools now, I'm done with that. But what helped a lot during the pandemic throughout, and that's a great thing now, and kind of a bit dog related, because obviously she has to go out. There needs to be some natural breaks during the day, and one being early in the morning as well, where we just have to go outside and go for a walk, and that really helped me a lot. Going even central London, where you don't have lots of green space, but even there, just going down to the canal, or and if it's just like for 20 minutes, just a change of scenery really does help a lot. And just walking there, either with the dog or by myself, or maybe with my husband, and it did make a big difference to how I was feeling. And you notice it as well. Sometimes I would go, because I was just so busy, I would for days just spend at home, because that's the problem with the pandemic of being at home. You would just constantly work and work and work, because your desk is basically right there all the time. And then once I did make an effort to go outside again, I realized, wow, I really needed that. Yeah, a massive change, and I need to keep it up. So definitely that was probably the biggest or the best thing, and also easy to do.
Yeah, I definitely went on a lot of days without using the daily walk that we were allowed to do, especially in the first lockdown. And on that one, it was kind of okay. But when the second one came, I was like, I think it's now been 4 days that I haven't actually felt the air in my face. I'm just going to go around and have that and I'm not a big walker or something, but you do realize that is something that is missing, because it was suddenly like, oh, I'm so grumpy, and like, oh yeah, I haven't been out all week. Like I just haven't been out because I've been desk, children, everything, and you just don't realize. And so that's definitely a big factor. And so now it's a bit time to start looking forward, hopefully. What are you looking forward in this period of uncertainty, and how are you looking forward and saying, oh, I can't wait for this? What will the new normal be?
So, I mean, the biggest thing I look forward to is just seeing my family again. Just maybe going on this plane, maybe going on a train, or going, somehow to get out. I mean, during the pandemic, I was thinking the other day, for half a year, I did not leave the city, or even like my neighborhood very much. And just going to see my family. I think that is definitely the one thing I look forward to the most. Just hugging my sister and my mom and my dad, and going back to the village, spending a bit of time in nature. Just generally getting out more.
Yes, that's definitely on a lot of plans for this summer, we hope. So before we finished, I want to just grab a little bit of your wisdom. Knowing what you know today, would you have given yourself different advice if you'd go back for 1 year?
Okay, if I could make other decisions about a year ago, I would have probably found a flat somewhere else and not in central London. I would have just moved somewhere else. It doesn't matter where, just somewhere else in the country with a bit more access to nature and greenery. So that probably I would have changed, yes, if I could go back. But I mean, it's fine. It wasn't like the worst place to be, but yeah, not much was happening for it being so central.
It's the price of central. We've spoke about many challenges in the last 45 minutes. What you think was your biggest challenge through this time, in these 18 months?
Well, loads of challenges, of course. I mean, but then as a business like ours, we always have challenges. If pandemic had not happened, we would have still had a ton of challenges, yes. And it might have even looked very similar. So initially challenged to like understand, okay, what are we going to do in terms of going forward, serving customers? How can we communicate with them now? Are they completely gone? And then also from a team perspective, I think that was a big challenge initially, just to understand, how should we be working going forward. Communication, so important, but really difficult to do if you don't like really put some effort or some thinking into it. Like, how do I communicate with the team? So important to just pick up the phone and have a conversation, and not just wait for the next Zoom call when that is scheduled. And so like things that would usually feel normal, like the chat in the office, where you can communicate quite easily. You have to really make an effort now, and just be aware that that's what you have to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was the biggest lesson you got from this pandemic?
That even in the worst times, like obviously we would have, when the pandemic initially hit, I mean, there were so many things that were completely uncertain, and lots of businesses didn't know whether they're going to survive or not. And obviously quite a few of them did not. But what we learned is, like, even in a pandemic, even in a very worst case scenario, there are still opportunities. So there's still good things that can come out of it. Obviously, they might not be immediately apparent because you're just instantly obviously fighting, trying to figure out what's going on, and sometimes you just can't know the answer straight away. You just have to wait a little bit, but there will be opportunities. You just have to like spend a bit of time with it and don't panic too much. So I think that was a good learning.
Would you have a word for 2021?
I'd say looking forward, as we said a few times already. Yeah, I think it's a good time to look forward, and there's a lot to look forward to. So I would say that is it. Don't look back too much because it was pretty rubbish like a year ago. So
that sounds like a brilliant way to finish us off for today. Thank you so much for being here today. It was lovely to speak to you, learn more about the business and more about you. And I appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you. It was great to speak to you as well.
I loved my conversation with Kerstin today. I'm always fascinated how someone identifies a gap in the market, goes after it step by step to build a business like the one Nix&Kix is today. Starting in the kitchen, starting by testing out the flavors, going out up to customers and asking them, what do you think of this flavor? It was great to know how it all started and also how it evolved through highs and lows, culminating in a very successful crowdfunding campaign that will continue to move the company forward. Kerstin also shared with us the not so high points and the challenges she had, and importantly, how she's looking forward to the future with a positive attitude. Looking forward is actually her chosen word for 2021. What is your word for 2021? Share your thoughts and reach out online. I'd love to hear from you. And before I go, a special credit to Alice Stansfield, who continues to make us sound and look even better and gives life to this podcast. Until next time, and I get to do this.